I wonder if any of you love 2-for-1 offers. Yes? Lots of you are nodding this morning. They're everywhere now. But one of the problems with 2-for-1 offers is that we end up with too much of whatever it is that's on offer, usually food. And when it comes to food, we have two options if we end up with too much. We can either eat too much of it or we can waste it. I'll let you guess which one I do most often. But reports say that too many of us waste the food that we get under these 2-for-1 offers. The local government association estimates that 2-for-1 creates £13.7 billion per year of wasted fresh produce. Because of these 2-for-1 offers, we end up buying too much fresh food and we end up throwing it away. A few years ago, Councillor Clyde Lokes, who was the LGA's Environment Board Vice Chairman, said, with more than 5 million tonnes of edible food thrown out each year, way too much food is being brought into homes in the first place. Retailers need to take a large slice of responsibility for that. Buy one, get one free deals, which give consumers a few days to munch through 16 clementines, are not about providing value for money. So, have a think this morning. When you go for one of those 2-for-1 offers, what do you do with what you've saved? Do you use it? Or are you honest enough this morning to say that you waste it? It might have been a great bargain at the time, but what do you do with what you've saved? I think that's a good question for Remembrance Sunday too. This year we have commemorated the 80th anniversary of VE Day. And when that came around, there were many documentaries on our televisions, newspaper articles, there were ceremonies and online religious services marking the occasion. And it brought to mind again, as Remembrance Sunday does, the human cost of World War II and other wars that we mark today. Cast your mind back to 2014. And you may remember that at the Tower of London, there was an art installation called Blood, Sweat, Lands and Seas of Red. If you want to remember what it looks like, then have a look on the live stream later, because it's on the screen just now. I believe they may have reinstalled something similar this year. But it was beautiful and poignant. Gail and I went to visit it that year. And it's the brainchild of artists Paul Cummins and Tom Piper. And it's an installation that's made up of 888,246 ceramic poppies. Each ceramic poppy representing a British military fatality during the First World War. And as you saw those poppies, and you might be able to picture the installation in your mind just now, it brought home the magnitude of the sacrifice that was made on our behalf. Those 888, 2,460 men and women, 383,667 who lost their lives in the Second World War, and over 4,000 people who've all died to defend our freedom since those conflicts. All add up to a huge sacrifice that was made on our behalf. And the question this morning is, what have we done? What have you done with what was saved by those sacrifices? What have you done with what they defended in their struggles, in their suffering, in their courage, and in their loss? To help us this morning, we're going to turn in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. And we're going to look at this story once more this morning. There's some message notes around the place if you want to use those to help you as we think through this story of Jesus this morning. The parable of the three servants, Matthew chapter 25 and verses 14 to 30. Again, says Jesus, The kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they'd used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." The servant who'd received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the man with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Here is your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I would have gotten some interest on it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Amen. That story of Jesus from the Bible this morning reminds us of the idea that Jesus entrusts to us something which we are called to use. Here is a rich and powerful man who entrusts property to 3 of his slaves while he went on a journey. And as we thought about a few weeks ago, literally each one of them, even the one who only received 1 bag of silver, received a fortune into their hands. And Jesus tells us that 2 of them went off and put the money to work and made substantial profits when their master returned. And each of them, the one with 5 bags and the one with 2 bags, were given the same full of praise. Matthew 25, verse 21 says, "The master was full of praise. 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.' But the 3rd slave, afraid of his master, simply buried the money that was entrusted to him. Now, he didn't lose any of it. The master got back exactly what had been given out. But he also didn't gain anything from what was given to him. And that's why the master reacted so angrily towards that 3rd slave. He says to him in verses 26 to 30, "You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops that I didn't plant and I gathered crops I didn't cultivate, Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. And then he orders, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The idea that Jesus is giving us here is that something, anything, had to be done with the treasure that this third slave was given. The other two did just that. They put the money they were given to work, and it developed and it grew. And they were commended for being good and trustworthy. The third slave was condemned simply because he buried what was entrusted to him. He allowed no chance for the treasure to be used or to grow and develop. Those who have died for our freedom in world wars and in other conflicts have entrusted us with treasure, the treasure of freedom, the treasure of justice. The question is this morning, what have we done with what they saved? Have we used it, or have we buried it?
Hi there. Just before we get on to the final point of this message, I wanted to jump on and say thanks for watching today. If these weekly sermons are feeding you spiritually, I invite you to join me daily. Subscribe for 5-minute devotionals every morning at 5 a.m. GMT, and for more of these weekly sermons. Now, let's jump back into this week's message.
When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister in 1940, he said that Britain and her allies were to wage war by sea, land and air with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us. To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. Had a bit of a way with words, didn't he, Sir Winston Churchill? But I'm reminded in those words of Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, where Paul says, we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Now, those of us who know the history of the Second World War will know that Hitler warped and twisted political power and institutions until they carried out pure acts of evil. He corrupted everything. And Ephesians reminds us that that corruption and hatred is an ever-present threat. And if we're honest, our news tells us that too. Today, we honour those who fought against such depravity and bitterness. But as we honour them, the question remains, what have we done with what they saved? This country has been taken to the brink on at least 2 occasions in the past 100 years or so. And people knew what was at risk in those 2 world wars. It was our very way of life. And by the end of those 2 world wars in 1945, we were painfully aware as a nation of the huge cost that it took to overcome that risk. We are saved, and we were saved for our freedom, but we can never forget the price that we paid. Do we take our freedom for granted? Has our relative prosperity since then made us forget what was sacrificed for that prosperity? We criticize our politicians today for forgetting that others fought for us to retain an open political system. We moan that things aren't the way they used to be, or the way that they should be. But do we actually do anything to change things for the better? Our market economy convinces us that everything comes down to a price and that individuals don't have an intrinsic value of their own. Many people today live for themselves and have little regard for those around them. Sometimes it feels like everywhere community is breaking down. But here's the thing. Jesus told this story of the three servants to denounce the scribes and the Pharisees. They were guilty of taking the law of Moses, the temple, the sign of God's presence amongst them, the wonderful promises of God's blessing, and burying them in the ground. They wanted religion without change. They wanted religion without risk. They presumed to trade with the responsibilities that God had given them. As people of faith, have we buried the treasure that our war dead fought for? Do we use it to ensure that life is better for the poor and the weak around us? As we honour our war dead today, let's take the opportunity to pledge ourselves again to use the freedom that they fought for, to live up to the responsibilities that God has given us, to make known the gospel of the kingdom in all we do, in all we say, in all we are. Let's be a good steward of God's world and God's resources. Let's care for others as Jesus did and as he would if he were here today. If we do that, then that will be the best way to honour those who fought for our freedom and whom we remember today. As we reflect on that message, we're going to listen to the beautiful melody of Repton. Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind. In purer lives thy service find. In deeper reverence, praise.